welcome to 1 Week, 1 Year, a podcast where we discuss a year of film history every episode, starting from 1895, the dawn of cinema. And this week, we're going to be talking about 1922, the Roaring Twenties. I am one of your hosts, Chris Ellie. I am a film projectionist, and right after I leave this episode, I have to go project a film on 35. So actively, joining me as always is...
I'm Glenn Covell. I'm a filmmaker. I don't have any plans to make a film this afternoon, but you know what? Maybe I'll get doing some writing or something like that. So you've inspired me.
It's a part of the filmmaking process.
Absolutely.
So all of you out there listening or watching on YouTube or online, just want to remind you that you can listen to our podcast in many formats. We are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all the podcast places, and we make it so that you can just listen if you like. But then we are also a YouTube show, so you can watch along with us, because all this stuff is copyright free, supposedly. And so, unless some French companies get in our way...
For at least the next, 6 episodes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then we have to figure out something new. Despite our issues with companies claiming that they own public domain footage and stopping our videos from being published, hypothetically, all of this stuff is public domain, so we can run it alongside our lovely voices. Mine is sick, so it's not that lovely.
It's got weight. It's got timbre. You know, It's got texture.
I'm always chasing after the timbre and texture. So you can go on YouTube and watch along if you like. With all that said, Glenn, how you doing? What's up?
Not much. I'm excited for this episode, but also next episode, because we're doing a field trip, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, we're going to be reporting live from the Kansas Silent Film Festival, and we're both going to be taking some cheap flights into Topeka and getting our safety last and covered wagon on.
I'm excited to see Safety Last in a theater. I think that'll be very cool.
Me too. And also, I think, Glenn, this might be the first time since the beginning of the podcast that you've seen live scored silent film.
Yeah, definitely.
So that is exciting. That's very exciting. I'm also excited about that. And I guess that's the main thing going on for me too. So now that we're done with the How You Doing segment, let's move on to one of our favorite segments. One that we don't always push till the last second to write.
Of course not.
The news.
We would never.
Yeah, no. The news of the year, to give us a little context for what is going on in 1922. So take it away, Glenn.
The news of the year, 1922. The United Kingdom's protectorate over Egypt ends, granting it independence. Mahatma Gandhi's campaign against British imperialism reaches a new chapter as he is arrested for sedition. In the wake of the Great War, hyperinflation strikes Germany. In 1919, the exchange was 12 marks to $1. At the dawn of this year, it's up to 563. Rebecca Latimer Felton becomes the first female U.S. Senator. The March on Rome begins the reign of the Fascist Party and its leader Benito Mussolini in Italy. Update: the exchange rate of German marks to American dollars is now 1,000. No, 3,000. Howard Carter and his men discover the tomb of King Tutankhamun. Have they unleashed a mummy's curse on the world? The British Broadcasting Company arrives on the airwaves. The Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America is founded. By the end of the year, the exchange rate of marks to dollars is now 7,000 to 1. The German economy has run amok. Murder in Tinseltown. Director William Desmond Taylor is shot in his home. Is Hollywood a hotbed for crime and corruption?
And that is some of the news of 1922.
Yeah. To give us a little more context, the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America is the kind of institutors, the enforcers of the infamous Hays Code.
Which is kind of, I mean, William Desmond Taylor's murder is kind of one of the big instigators of that.
Yeah, corruption and debauchery in Hollywood. Mean that we've got to bring the Catholics in to tell us
exactly
what's okay and what's not.
Yeah, that murder is still unsolved. But some of the suspects at the time were Mabel Normand was a friend of William Desmond Taylor.
Not our Mabel.
Some stuff. Yeah, no. Mabel in the news again for being a murder suspect. Even if she definitely did not do it.
We're coming down on that. We're coming down with our the official stance of the podcast is that
Mabel Normand did not shoot William Desmond Taylor. Yeah. I think she was maybe one of the last people to see him alive, though, which is pretty nuts. Other than whoever the murderer was.
Are we a true crime podcast now?
I guess so, yeah. Because there's not enough of those. Instead, we're a movie podcast, because there aren't enough of those either.
Not enough with our gimmick. We've got a gimmick.
We do have a good gimmick.
Anyway, speaking of movies, let's talk about the movies that we watched. Let's be two guys, two men talking about movies that we watched. Let's get into our segment 1 Week 1 Reel, where we talk about
mostly 2 real movies.
Yeah, where we talk about some shorties, some short films, which maybe the line between feature film and short film is a little blurry at this point, and some of these things, I feel like what we're calling the cutoff at this point is maybe 45 minutes or 50 minutes to become a feature film.
Yeah, it's 4 reels or more, 5 reels or more.
Hard to say.
I think that's kind of how they cut it off at the time, but yeah.
Because we're guys being dudes, let's start off with the one about baseball, Casey at the Bat. This is an experimental film from this time, but not like the ones that we talked about last episode.
Right. Yeah.
It is a sort of technological experiment of synchronized sound on film.
The outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mustang Nine that day. The score stood 4-2, with but 1 inning more to play. And so when Cooney died at first, and Burroughs did the same, a sickly silence fell upon the patrons of the game.
Once again, every time somebody tells you that something happened for the first time in the silent era, they are lying to you.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't...
Or leaving out some big qualifiers.
Right.
Yeah.
This, unlike the jazz singer, which we will get to, this is... the jazz singer uses a technology called Vitaphone, which is basically putting a cue somewhere to start a record. And then the record is playing the audio in synchronization, hypothetically, with the film itself. Where this is a 6-minute short of just a vaudeville performer reading a poem about the glory of baseball.
About baseball.
Take me out to the ball game type stuff.
But in very old-timey vaudeville speak.
Yeah. And really just glorifying and
rolling the R's.
But this is actual sound that is printed on the film in the way that it is today, for 35mm prints that are still made today, and the way that it has been done ever since the sound era, up until the digital era. This is the 1921-22. This era is the beginning of this format that was invented by Lee DeForest of photofilm, sound on film.
Phonofilm, right?
Oh, yes, phonofilm. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, because I feel like, everyone talks about the Jazz Singer as like the beginning of talkies, which, I mean, it is in terms of
Like
culturally and popularity, but I think it's interesting that this movie's significantly earlier. I mean, it's a short. It's not really a film so much as it's just a recording of a poem being read. But like the technology of phonofilm is, I don't know. I guess more advanced, right? Because it is. I mean, it's.
I think so.
What leads to the technology that becomes kind of standard for the next 90 years.
Yeah. I mean, it is. It doesn't have the potential downsides of Vitaphone, where there are two separate objects that are playing the film and playing the audio, and I think that Vitaphone can get out of sync. I'm not sure, but like there are some safeguards. But like the bonus of this is that it is on the film itself, so it has all of the benefits when it comes to splicing and when it comes to potential sound getting messed up. That it is right there on the film, so that's good.
Yeah. Although watching it, other than the sort of technological significance of it and other phonofilms from around this time, it's like as its own object, I guess. It's whatever. It's a guy reading a poem about baseball.
Yeah, who cares? Yeah, it's a guy stepping out from a curtain and being all kind of old timey fancy and talking about the glory of baseball, which I don't care about. What I care about is film. To get a little in depth on the technology, this uses the way that sound is printed on film is it's just kind of in a strip on the edge of the image, in between the sprocket holes, and it's like the way that modern film or film from the 30s or whatever on does this is by using variable area sound, which is basically like looks like a waveform printed on the side of the film.
You can see it in the logo for this show.
Indeed you can. You can see this in every episode, every piece of episode art. That's a good note. That is a photo that I took of a King Kong print, and that we have placed other photos in. So that audio, you could actually look at that waveform and extract some tiny 24th of a second chunk of audio from King Kong. Copyright infringement.
Airplane noise.
Yes, yeah, I think it was around that scene in the movie. This uses variable density, so it does not look like a waveform like in the podcast logo. It basically looks like a bunch of like, it almost looks like a barcode in a way, but with like shades of gray. So the way that this technology works is there's like a light emitter and a sensor on either side of this strip, and the more light that's let through, it like changes like the pitch of the audio. This works in the same way, and these can actually, like, variable density and variable area sound can be read on the same readers, because it's the same size strip, and it's letting across different degrees of audio, right. But yeah, it's basically like how dark the film is versus how much of the film is dark, basically.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's a little in the weeds, but I'm a projectionist. Yeah. What do you want from me?
Yeah. No, I find it very, very interesting, and just to think about like the the engineering that it took to figure this stuff out when it hadn't been done before is always very I just find very interesting.
Oh yeah.
Like, I feel like since basically the 1930s, I feel like film technology, like 35mm film technology, has been so standardized. Basically until digital took over.
Yeah.
But it's
just
like
a decade ago.
Just to figure all that stuff out is like, and the stuff that like the roads not taken are always really interesting. Of things like phytophone or like early color processes, which we'll also talk about this episode.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's an exciting time for film technology.
For sure, yeah. There's going to be a lot of technology stuff in this episode.
Yeah, it's going to be a very, very tech-heavy episode.
Speaking of, there's a YouTube channel that I highly recommend. I love this channel called Technology Connections. And he recently did a video about sound on film that touches on Lee DeForest and the way that all of this stuff works. And if anybody's interested in that, I would highly recommend it. I'll link it in the show notes.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to check that out too.
So yeah, this is, we're just talking about this from a technological perspective. We don't really care about this movie as a thing.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's an example of there's like a bunch of these phono films being made.
Yeah, as like a demo.
This is just kind of one of them. And yeah, they exist kind of mostly as tech demos. Yeah. It's like,
yeah, they play in a few theaters, but they're really meant to be like shown to studios to sell them on this technology.
Yeah.
Let's
how to segue into other shorts.
We don't always have to have a segue, I suppose. Cops by Buster Keaton and Eddie Klein.
Indeed. I thought this was kind of weirdly dark for a Buster Keaton movie.
Yeah.
At least the ending of it, anyway.
Yes, it ends with him getting caught by the cops, and then there is a tombstone that says Buster Keaton.
Presumably beaten to death.
And it's got his signature hat on the tombstone.
Yeah, they left his pork pie on the tombstone.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some kind of supposition that because this was being filmed around the trial of Roscoe Arbuckle, that it could have influenced the darkness of this one. It's still funny.
I mean, maybe. Yeah. I also read that that might be entirely true. I feel like there's not a lot in the text of this movie that necessarily reflects that. Like,
there's no direct evidence for sure.
The idea of someone comedically running away from a bunch of cops is kind of the oldest trick in the book.
I know, this is like harkening back to like an early genre of running from cops movies. That
was very, very early. I feel like, Aliski made running from cop movies. Like that was almost right away. They're like, how can we make a comedy with motion picture? Have people running from cops.
This short also opens with a shot that I really like, where it has this like subversion in the style of the beginning of the Charlie Chaplin movie The Immigrant, where it looks like Buster Keaton is in jail, but he is just talking to a lady on the other side of a gate in a park.
Yeah. But just that, like, playing with what's in the frame and like that kind of thing is I don't know, I feel like in 1912, like 10 years before this, I feel like that wouldn't have even necessarily occurred to people as much. And that's a big thing with Buster Keaton too, of like playing with the framing of things and like perspective and figuring out how to like frame something in the funniest possible way.
Yeah, I mean, like, if we were to compare it to the similar thing in The Immigrant, where, at the beginning of the movie, you see him, like hunched over the edge of a boat, and it looks like he's seasick, but it turns out that he's fishing. It's a similar joke where it's like a reveal of like something less severe than it looks.
Yeah.
But this one, as you're noting, is telling the joke with the camera rather than just with the motion or the action.
It's like that joke wouldn't work in any other medium.
Right.
I guess it could work in a comic book, but like in terms of like you couldn't do it on the stage, you know. There's a couple other sort of like, I mean, there's a very famous stunt in this one of Buster Keaton grabbing onto a moving car and like getting yanked off screen by it, which I guess he just did for real.
I wouldn't be surprised. I saw that. I've seen that clip before, but like I saw it and I just like my mouth dropped. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
I was shocked at just Buster Keaton's recklessness.
Yeah. It looks like a cartoon. Like it doesn't.
Yeah.
It kind of doesn't look real just because of how like goofy it is. It's a great stunt. It's a great shot.
Yeah. Probably
there's
dislocated his arm while he was doing it.
Probably. There's a really good there's an episode of Every Frame a Painting, the great YouTube series about Buster Keaton and how he frames stuff and how he kind of approaches physical comedy in like filmmaking, which I'd seen before, but I revisited for this after watching this movie. And yeah, just shout out to Every Frame a Painting. They don't need
OG film essayist.
Yeah, pretty much. This movie is basically just Buster Keaton sort of inadvertently or sort of accidentally ends up throwing a bomb into a crowd during a police parade. And so then he has an entire parade of police after him, and they're just kind of chasing him around.
There's also just like a lot of people like accidentally stealing things in this movie. He sees a horse that has a sign on it that says $5, and he just gives a random guy standing next to the horse $5, walks away with the horse, and then you see that it is a sign for a suit and not a horse.
But even that is the thing where it's like the horse is blocking part of the sign.
Yeah.
So then he takes the horse away and reveals the full... Like, that's the sort of... There's a lot of that kind of thing in Buster Keaton movies.
As we were touching on with the last episode, I'm noticing that I see a lot more Looney Tunes DNA in Buster Keaton than in, like, Charlie Chaplin, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that thing with the horse is a very Looney Tunes joke, I feel like, as well.
For sure. Another like kind of weird thing that I took note of is as he's holding this sort of cartoon bomb with like the big fuse coming out of it, he lights a cigarette with it, which is exactly how Harold Lloyd blew off his fingers. He was lighting a cigarette with what he thought was a prop bomb, and it was a real bomb.
Oh my god, I didn't.
And it blew up in his hand. So I don't know if that was a deliberate sort of reference to that, because that doesn't happen. But maybe there's just a common gag is lighting a cigarette with a bomb.
It's it's pretty iconic. If it were less cartoony, it would be cool in like an 80s action movie.
Yeah, in an 80s action movie, it would be like I feel like a bundle of dynamite or something like that. It wouldn't be a like round fuse, like a Looney Tunes thing.
One other thing that I see, I don't know if the origin of this image is from this movie or not, but and part of the movie, Buster Keaton is driving like a big carriage, and he's trying to like do like turn signals with his hand, and he gets this kind of like extending like clothes rack thing, those like kind of scissor arms that you squeeze together and they extend really far, and then he puts a boxing glove on the end of it. And he's using it to do turn signals, but I'm like, is this new? Is this the origin of that extending boxing glove?
The extending boxing glove thing? It might be. Like, as far as I know, Sure.
So he initially is trying to use it for turn signaling, but then he clocks a cop in the face.
Yeah. Naturally, he ends up punching someone with his boxing glove.
His big
Extendo
old
boxing glove.
punching machine. He can't type though. Do you have any? Oh yeah. I have one more note on this movie, which is when he's on this horse-drawn carriage. There's a point where the horse kind of starts getting tired and losing its vitality, and so he takes it into a goat gland clinic, which, if any of you I actually haven't seen this, but I just know that this documentary, but I know the story of John R. Brinkley, legendary huckster. There's a documentary called Nuts that's about him, where he surgically implanted goat testicles in many, many men to to revive their vitality. Wikipedia lists him as like his occupation as charlatan. But yeah, I guess it's a reference to that guy because like he brings the horse into this clinic, and then the horse has got all of this extra energy.
Oh damn! I see. I completely missed that gag. So
yeah, and then he sees the horse and he's like, oh, it looks pretty good, and then he goes in himself to get implanted with goat balls. Do you have anything else on Cops?
I don't think so. I mean, it's like I think it's a good example of the types of gags that Buster Keaton is doing, of like some really wild stunt stuff, and also like really creative use of framing and like just like visual storytelling stuff.
Bad boys.
But it also is like not, I don't know, like 1 week was a lot better, I thought.
Yeah.
In terms of like its whole setup, and it's sort of I feel like Buster Keaton is still, at least with the shorts, is still very much in the mode of just like the loosest possible setup of plot, and then just sort of like as many gags as he can wring out of it.
That's true. It's definitely like Chaplin's trying to start like elevating it a little bit.
Yeah.
You know? And
This is elevated slapstick.
Our other one-reelers are a tale of some dueling adaptations of the same story.
I mean, I don't know if they were dueling necessarily, if they were ever in competition.
They're in competition for me.
There you
I
go.
like one better than the other one.
Me too.
These are Cinderella by Lotte Reineger and Walt Disney.
Indeed. Well, Cinderella by Walt Disney and Aschenputtel by Lotte Reineger.
Yes.
I guess maybe start with the Disney one, because that's sort of the more traditional, I guess.
Yeah. It looks like it's kind of made in the style of the Fleischer cartoons of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so.
It just cartoony 2D animation, a little choppy, but using a lot of the same kind of visual language.
Yeah.
This was made at Disney's Laugh-O-Gram Studios, which was...
Well, I mean, he didn't even own Laugh-O-Gram Studio. He was just an animator there, I thought.
I thought he founded it.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong.
I think... I don't know, we can... what I read is that he founded Laugh-O-Gram Studios when he was 19 with his brother. And that is in Kansas City, and we will be visiting the site of Laugh-O-Gram Studios very soon.
The empty shell that was once Laugh-O-Gram Studios.
Yeah. So Disney made a number of laughing telegrams until his company went under, and he went to LA and founded the Disney company that owns our lives and Avatar.
Indeed.
And Iron Man
And Star Wars.
But this is where it started out. These laugh-o-grams. And yeah, this it's nice.
It's a kind of a pretty. I think we haven't really gotten into them that much, but like the early 20s style of animation of like dancing with like jelly limbs, and there's a winky moon.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's not even that advanced yet of those like rubber hose animation. It's still like almost like using the language of comic strips, and it's like a little herky jerky in that like early Felix way and all that kind of thing.
The prince in this movie is described as a wonderful fellow, but the first scene we see him is him hunting and killing not just like a family of bears, like an entire bear community.
Yeah,
who are all like happy and dancing, and he just goes in and murders all of them. It's
a strange juxtaposition.
And I'm like, is this ironic? Is this like, oh, the prince isn't actually a wonderful fellow? He's a mass murderer of bears. But it's the olden times. That might have just been like, yeah, he's great. What's not to like?
It makes me think back to that.
But then why show the bears are like happy? You know?
Yeah, they're all like playing saxophone really aggressively or whatever, until the lovely prince comes to destroy them. It reminded me of the I'm forgetting the title. It was like the 1907 or something like that, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears.
Oh yeah, where Teddy Roosevelt shows up at the end and kills all the bears.
Yeah, hilarious, amazing. This the time period of this one is a little strange. It has some kind of modern elements to it, even though like some of it seems a little old timey. When Cinderella gets her carriage, it's like a car, and her glow up is looking a bit like a flapper. Which I thought was kind of fun.
It's like a contemporary telling of Cinderella, very very loose telling of Cinderella.
There's one gag in this that I really liked, which is the prince is like going after trying to find Cinderella, and he's like following footsteps, and at the end of the footsteps he sees a duck, and and then you're like, okay, I guess like the trail ends and there's a duck there, and then the duck stands up and it's wearing shoes and walks away. I like that bit a lot.
That is a very good bit. I think the better of these two though is the German one.
Yeah.
Which is a different type of animation than we're used to seeing, I guess. It is all sort of cut out silhouettes. So it's sort of like it is animation. It's not actual puppetry, but it sort of looks like shadow puppets. It sort of exists somewhere between shadow puppets and traditional animation. So it's got this sort of like paper cutout look. But yeah, all in sort of the black and white silhouette visual style.
It's really elegant, I think. The animation. It's more flowing and smooth than the animation in these cartoons, even though it is made with like physical items, like they're animated at kind of a higher frame rate. I think it like looks really nice.
It does the thing in a lot of early animation where it feels the need to like explain how it was made at the beginning.
Yeah, I know. They can't resist.
Yeah.
It starts off with like a pair of hands cutting the figures in silhouette, and then they kind of become puppets.
And yeah, this one is quite a bit darker than the Disney Laugh-O-Gram version. It keeps the thing from the fairy tale of one of the stepsister's cutting off her foot to fit into the slipper.
Oh, I didn't realize that was in the original fairy tale. I saw that and
Yeah.
I jumped out of my seat.
Yeah. No, it gets dark. There's also a bit, I mean, this is in the English intertitles. I don't know if this is just a weird translation thing, but right in the beginning there's a bit where someone says, "There's no place in court for a slut." I'm like, oh damn, okay.
Yeah. Her
Ouch.
stepsisters are very mean. and not third wave at all.
Yeah. So this is not the sanitized Disney version. This is the
edgy German version.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is made by Lotte Reineger, who she has made a couple of short films. This is one of the longer ones that she's made so far. And in a couple years, she'll make The Adventures of Prince Ahmed. In this, and all of her films are in this style. That movie that I just mentioned is a feature animated film, which once again, a lot of people go around saying that Snow White is the first animated film.
Yeah.
Or feature film, but it is not. And in this movie though, I love the style of this. I think that like the imagery in it is so cool. With the silhouettes and just the way that she's shooting it, she's able to play with the frame in so many really interesting ways. Change the shape of the frame and like move it around. Have like jagged edges and like things revealing themselves. And yeah, just the way the characters move it's just like, it's beautiful. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how much of it like a direct influence her animation had on later things, but it's definitely, I see this pop up in other things of like shadow puppety animation stuff. Another thing that Lotte Reineger invented that I think Disney also kind of got credit for is a multi-pane camera. So having like multiple sort of multiple panes or multiple images sort of spread out, and then a camera capturing all of them and kind of compressing them into a single image.
To provide some kind of like parallax and depth of field and that kind of thing.
Yeah, which is I don't know if they were just invented separately in different countries, and you know, one of them got credit and the other one didn't, or if like the Disney technique actually did sort of use her multi-pane camera as inspiration. I don't know.
No, from what I saw, she invented it a good number of years before Disney, quote unquote, invented it, and he was like directly inspired by her process.
Okay, cool. So as expected, stole it. Great. Not off to a great start, Disney.
He's a complicated guy.
Yeah, he's a complicated fella. But yeah, it's a good example of a thing that we run into a lot of, like the generally accepted beginning of something that actually started way earlier and by different people.
Yeah, and like these kind of famous men of film history having just like lifted things and called it their own, basically.
Yeah, 100%. Even the Laugh-O-Gram kind of animation feels very, very Fleischer inspired. Like it is basically taking the Fleischer brothers animation and just kind of not necessarily copying it wholesale, but just very much lifting that kind of stylization and probably the technique of it also.
Although Disney might have used animation cells, and I know that Fleischer tried to avoid using them for and go on paper for licensing reasons.
Yeah.
One other thing that I want to say, one like small note about this Lotte Reineger Cinderella that I want to say is there is a genius like visual storytelling piece in it, which is there isn't really dialogue in this movie so much. Like, it's told like as a narrator, and then everything else is kind of like acted out and like visually told to you.
Yeah.
And the way that it displays the time at her time at the party getting close to the end is there is like a clock. A lot of these Cinderella adaptations, they will cut back to a clock. Oh no, it's getting close to midnight. For some reason in this it's 1 a.m, but it's getting close to midnight. Like what, the tension is increasing, right? In this, on the clock, the hour hand has a silhouette of Cinderella, and the minute hand has a silhouette of the prince. And so it keeps cutting back to the clock with the minute hand getting closer to the hour hand as it gets closer to 1 a.m. And as it cuts back, it's the prince and Cinderella bonding. So they're getting closer to each other emotionally. But then the figures of them are getting closer to each other on the clock. But then the tension is ratcheting up because as they get closer to each other, they're getting to a point where they have to get away from each other.
Their time is running out.
It's such a good visual metaphor. It's so genius. It's so good.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah. This movie's awesome. I think it's really cool.
It is. I didn't really know about it until like a week ago. And yeah, I'm glad that we're covering it.
Yeah, we almost didn't watch this because I did not find this in my research, and then Glenn hopped on, told me to watch it, and I'm glad you did.
It recently screened somewhere. I forget where in New York, and that's how I found out about it. I didn't go to the screening, but it was recently screening as part of like an animation retrospective or something.
Oh man,
yeah.
Come on, Glenn, I want to go to these things. I'm jealous.
There's too many of them.
You just got to use your Alamo season pass instead.
Yeah, I gotta see Ant-Man.
Well, speaking of Ant-Man, which is a feature film, let's get ready for our feature presentation.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
I feel like we should leave the big one till the end.
Ooh. Hey everybody, stick around if you want to hear about Nosferatu.
I feel like we should talk about Nosferatu last because it is like the biggest movie of this year.
Well, another movie that is, in a sense, the biggest movie of this year is Foolish Wives, which was, it seems to have been, and maybe was at least marketed this way as the most expensive movie so far, or at least the first $1 million picture. It is by
Erich von Stroheim.
Which made me think that this was a German movie, and then I realized that it's an American movie.
No. He was an Austrian immigrant. He was born in Austria and moved to the United States. An interesting thing was when he immigrated to the U.S., he pretended to be a count. Erich von Stroheim is just a guy. Like, he has no royal family history. But he pretended to be when he first moved to the U.S., and that is basically what this movie is about. It's a con artist movie.
Yeah. It's about some kind of people who are pretending to be Russian royalty, a family of Russian royalty, who are trying to get their way into high society in Monte Carlo.
Monte Carlo.
So that they can rip people off and steal their money.
Yeah. Watching this movie, I'm like, oh wow, there are a lot of cool like location shooting in Monte Carlo. Great big buildings, like it's very, very lavish. And then I realized, researching it later, they shot this entirely in California, and they just built Monte Carlo.
Which is why it was so expensive.
Yeah.
Like watching this movie, and granted, this movie was originally supposed to be 10 hours long, and it was cut down to 2.5.
I don't know. I wonder about that too, of like, did they shoot 10 hours of footage and then just cut from that? Or was it actually intended to be 10 hours long?
they shot like 300,000 feet of footage or more, which I think like after it was like cut down to like stuff they wanted to use in the movie, it was like 200,000 something. It like, I don't know exactly how many minutes that ends up being, but like he intended the movie to be real long and seen over the course of 2 nights.
Okay.
It's and they had to like wrestle him out of the editing bay because he kept he kept like making it longer.
Yeah.
Eric von Stroheim, the more that I read about him, the more of a wild guy he seems to be.
Oh yeah. He seems to be, he's kind of I feel like he is almost this like quintessential like early Hollywood figure of this like, you know, heavily accented, very demanding sort of egotistical director who walks around in jodhpurs with a monocle and is like, we must make the picture longer. And so I don't know, I just think it's interesting that there's almost this like cliche like stock character of the like German director making silent movies in Hollywood, that it's like, that's just this guy.
Yeah. I saw someone on RogerEbert.com talking about this movie, and this was written in August 2022, and he compared this director to Kanye in his egotism, which I don't know exactly when all of this Kanye stuff really took an extreme turn for the worse, but it must have been right after that. I don't think you'd be invoking Kanye in the same way that we have invoked Kanye for the last 15 years today.
Oh no, yeah, very different.
This is one of the ways that. Sorry, one of the ways that he is being egotistical is that in this movie, they're reading, this movie's called Foolish Wives, it's written and directed and starring Eric von Stroheim, and then someone is picking up and reading a book called Foolish Wives, written by Eric von Stroheim, in the movie.
That's a ballsy move. It made me think, oh, did he write a book and then adapted it? And I'm like, that's still a ballsy move to be like, I adapted my own book and the book is in the movie. But the fact that there isn't a real book, that there's just this fictional book within the movie called Foolish Wives that's also called Foolish Wives, is somehow even weirder than
I mean, apparently he claimed that it was a real book. He never wrote it, but he put it in the movie and told people that he was adapting it from his own book. This guy is insane.
I mean, he kind of was a con artist himself.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
there's definitely a lot of kind of like self-reflexive, like self-mirroring going on in this movie.
Self-reporting, as the kids say.
And it, I don't know, it is a very kind of like lavish, indulgent movie. Both the sort of like production of it, the runtime of it, everything about it. It's a movie about, you know, rich people trying to do rich people stuff. It's a lot of very old-timey rich person activities.
Eating caviar.
Which
he insisted was real caviar that he was eating.
Hanging out at restaurants while shooting birds. Hanging out in cool boats. Drinking ox blood for breakfast.
Yeah, I don't know what's up with that.
Maybe that was just a thing that people did in Monte Carlo. I don't know. I mean, this movie's kind of... this movie's more of a romp than I expected it to be. I expected this movie to be kind of long and dry, and it's pretty... It seems intentionally kind of silly at times. Like, there's definitely a lot of comedy and, like, hijinks going on.
At times. I mean, I think that this is still a little dry. I kind of thought of this as, like, similar, like, subject matter and pacing to an opera, which also, like, kind of checks out with his whole, like, this needs to be long and you watch it over 2 nights, like the Ring cycle or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, this movie is kind of famously, even the version of it that we watched is, like, cut down from what... I think even not even the 10-hour one, but there was like a 6-hour one that he wanted to release that I think did actually get screened at least once or twice.
This movie does feel cut down. Like it's long, but there are scenes, and this is parts of it are missing and that kind of thing. But there are things that just kind of come out of nowhere in this movie that seem like very clearly were probably more established in a longer cut.
I do think it also a lot of things about it feel very indulgent, and it like there's plenty of times where it's it uses like 3 or 4 shots of something when I feel like one would do. But it is still, there's definitely some kind of like visual stuff that is I feel like somewhat forward thinking in terms of how it's being presented. Of just like visual stuff we haven't really seen a lot of before. There's like right in the first scene there's a sort of like tilt up POV reveal shot of someone. Which is like a very basic thing, but is still feels sort of a bit new at this point.
Yeah, another kind of shot that seemed like from the future a little bit that I saw was like an over the shoulder dialogue shot, like a 2-shot.
There's a bunch of those in this movie.
Yeah, I think that's you don't see that kind of thing in movies from this time. I don't think I've seen that before.
There's a scene that's lit with light coming through Venetian blinds, the kind of classic like film noir look of the like slatted light coming through.
Yeah.
That looks great. I don't think we've seen that in anything before this.
It's really dramatic lighting.
I don't necessarily think that this movie invented it, but I think it's the first time that we've come across it on the show.
And one other thing that like is definitely like, you know, it's something that someone could have always done, but it kind of called out to me was there's one point where one of the husbands of the foolish wives is looking at a note that the Count wrote to one of the women, and his blood is boiling because he knows that the Count is trying to like seduce his wife and scam her, and he holds the note, and then like a superimposed image of the Count's face like laughing, his like monocled his monocled face just like like on top of the money. That was a fun shot as well.
There is an element to this movie that like the Count looks really ridiculous in a way that I think he looked less ridiculous in 1922. I think he's meant to look a little ridiculous, but like especially now he looks like, I don't know, like a submarine captain or something. He's got a monocle. He's got this like bright white uniform with medals on it. He's got jodhpurs. He's like always carrying
cigarette.
Yeah, not a cigarette holder, just a really long cigarette. He has a cane. He has a monocle. He just looks like kind of like a Looney Tunes villain. I'm sure there's some Looney Tunes where there's a Eric von Stroheim caricature. This movie is basically about the 1920s equivalent of the like Nigerian prince email scam of like I'm like a rich wealthy person, like give me a little bit of money so I can, you know, bring my fortune here or whatever. And then and this movie is pretty plotty. I don't think we need to go through all the machinations of it. Being a sort of con artist movie, it has a lot of different. He's like this guy, the Count. I forget his whole. He has this insanely long title. I'm just gonna call him Eric von Stroheim. But he's like scamming all these people. His big thing is that he like seduces women, right? That's like his go-to.
And he's got some kind of sitcom-y things with like, oh, I gotta please this lady and keep this one from not knowing about the other one.
I gotta trap this lady in an old creepy house with a witch, because that's how you win over a woman.
That was a strange segment.
Yeah, that was a very strange segment. There is a shot in that I think is really great where he is like creepily holding up a mirror to his face to watch the woman getting undressed behind him. And so you can like see her reflected in the mirror at the same time as his face as he's being a creep, which is just a really great shot of like combining all those things within a single frame. And then I was sort of wondering, like, how much is this movie aware of how creepy this is? Of, like, is this being presented as just a normal thing or not? But then the fact that it immediately kind of undercuts that with a goat butt kind of, like, moving into his field of view, and he has to, like, push a goat out of the way. I'm like, all right, he's at least somewhat aware, I think, of, like, the comedy of this movie and the sort of absurdity of a lot of it.
Yeah, I would say that it's primarily a drama, but there are comedic moments.
Yeah. There's a weird recurring gag with the bodyguard who has no arms.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't find out until the end that because there's this repeated thing where, like, someone will drop something and the bodyguard won't pick it up. And it's like, what the hell, man? You're standing right there. And then at the end you find out he doesn't have any arms.
I didn't realize that was the same guy every time. I thought it was just like a motif about ladies dropping their jackets. But that's good.
Fun bit of trivia, the actor who plays that guy is named Harrison Ford.
Wow. Amazing.
So there's all this con artist stuff, and then one of the things that does feel very... Like, one of the things that feels pretty missing from the movie is that the Count is killed at the end. But it happens off screen, which is really weird.
Yeah.
You'd think that they would have at least shot that, you know?
Yeah, and it's like maybe they just cut it out in a way that, I don't know, was really, not well done, I suppose.
Yeah. A thing that I read, I don't know if this is actually true, but I hope it is that the scene as written was that he's murdered and then dumped in the sewer. And we see his body dumped into a sewer. But after that, we were supposed to see the body, like, going through the sewers underneath Monte Carlo and getting flushed out into the ocean, where it was then eaten by an octopus. Which,
oh my god,
again, I don't know how true that is. I don't know if they ever shot that. I don't know how made up any of it is. But I really wish that was in the movie, because I want to see it.
A couple, like, small moments from this movie. The kind of main woman that he's trying to scam, just like a princess, or no, she's an American.
Yeah, she is married to, I think, like a senator or like some bigwig American politician.
And she's she's trying to, like, seduce her and get her in a situation and, like, get her emotions in a situation where she'll give him lots of money. And so they start hanging out, and the guy she's married to is getting all jealous, and she's trying to navigate that. And she says, "Well, I'm free, white, and 21. I can do what I want." And then the guy says, "Well, I'm married, sunburned, and 41." Which is a wild exchange for a number of reasons.
Yeah. I think this movie is also, like, there's a lot more dialogue than we're used to seeing, even though it's all intertitles. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a lot of talking in this movie.
Yeah. There's a lot of talking, and there's also just a lot of, like, very flowery intertitles.
Oh, yeah.
It's, you know, we're just trying to set the scene of it being nighttime, and it's talking about, like, the...
Oh, my God.
It's talking about, like, the nature of man or whatever.
Yeah. No, it's, like, it is laughable how sort of, like, flowery the intertitles of this movie are. Like, I think this movie takes the cake for, like, most overwritten intertitles over whatever. Like, I think Intolerance was probably the winner before.
Oh, yeah. Intolerance with its, like, paragraph markers and stuff.
Yeah, Jesus. Yeah. But I don't know. I think this movie is sort of, it's not as self-serious as, like, D.W. Griffith movies are. There's a bit more levity, and it's just a bit more wild, I guess, in terms of, like, what is being put on screen. and just kind of the overall tone of it.
I mean, speaking of, Eric von Stroheim got his start in a major way by working with D.W. Griffith.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, he was in one of the movies that we watched. I think uncredited as like a German soldier.
He also, I mean,
he played a lot of German soldiers in World War One propaganda movies.
And he started off as a stuntman. Like, he kind of like worked his way up to director. But he, I think he was. I read somewhere that he was like assistant directing on Intolerance at a point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think again, sort of like unofficially or uncredited. Yeah. But like that's actually what he was doing.
Yeah, D.W. Griffith would not credit anyone who helped him. There's a kind of fun fight toward the end of this movie where the husband of the kind of main woman he's scamming confronts him, and he finds him in a casino, and then he yells at him, "Take off your monocle," and then the husband socks him in the face, and he goes, "Go to hell." Yeah.
There is another just bit of random trivia about this movie. There's an episode of the Young Indiana Jones TV show from the 90s, where a young Indiana Jones is hired to wrangle Eric von Stroheim into finishing this movie.
Oh wow.
So if you want to see a fictional depiction of this movie being made, you can find that episode on YouTube somewhere.
That's awesome. I want to watch that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I thought this movie isn't great. Like, there's definitely a lot of sort of like arguably pretty misogynistic shit in it.
Oh, sure.
But I don't know. I had fun with it. It was actually it was more entertaining than I expected it to be. I expected it to be kind of a slog to get through because I knew it was old and indulgent, and I was like, oh boy. And it was more fun than I expected.
Yeah, I mean, there were fun elements. I thought I didn't think it was bad, but I thought it was like okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, like, the indulgences are so much of like a behind the scenes thing, because this movie would not have been the most expensive movie made up to this point if they just shot on location.
Right. Yeah.
Like you're not. The thing is, like, you're not really even like seeing the budget so much, because the budget is being spent on ridiculous things, like recreating Monte Carlo in Hollywood and the actors eating real caviar on set.
And I think even like the costumes, like, he required that like people, all like the rich people wore actual like silk underwear or whatever, and it's just like, you're never gonna. Then that's always a question with filmmaking of like, is it worth spending money on all this stuff that isn't going to show up on screen but might sort of like affect the atmosphere of it?
Yeah. He wanted the Monaco money to be so realistic that he used real like counterfeiting practices to make the money, and then got like briefly arrested during the movie.
There is a lot of fun behind the scenes stuff about this movie too, just like how absurdly kind of lavish the production was.
learning from his
right, yeah, his former boss.
Yeah. The word I was searching for is something other than senpai, but I didn't want to say senpai. All right, let's move on.
Let's move on to, I guess, another movie that is probably more interesting for the technology behind it than the movie itself.
Yeah.
Which is The Toll of the Sea, which is the first, like, genuinely the first Technicolor film.
It is
feature
not.
film.
It's the second.
Feature film. Is it?
There was one previous that did not get a wide release, and it was shot in a way that was not able to be played on most projectors.
Oh, right, yeah.
But there was another feature film that is now lost that was a previous Technicolor feature.
And that was Technicolor, but it wasn't the same process as this. That was, yeah. So no, you're right. I was gonna give this an honorific that you're right. It doesn't actually deserve.
It is the first starring role for Anna May Wong, who we are now touching on for the first time.
Yeah.
A big silent movie star.
Yeah. Huge silent movie star. And I haven't seen any of her movies up until this one. So, but this movie is directed by Chester M. Franklin, and it is a kind of loose adaptation of Madame Butterfly, but kind of set in China in the 1920s instead of Japan in whenever Madame Butterfly is set. Not the best movie, and I feel like it even when it came out, I think it existed kind of more just to kind of show off the technology than necessarily to like. I feel like its story stuff is very. It feels very I don't know, old fashioned even for this time.
Right, and like I think people at the time, like enjoyed it well enough at the time, but I think it was seen as a gimmick for sure. I was reading that they kind of had a hard time scoring big actors to get on this thing because it's just like Technicolor is making this movie that's in color crazy, Part of the reason they picked the setting and the story itself was to like justify the technology. This movie is like technology. It's very Cameron. It's technology first, story second. I know we were just talking about Avatar, but I don't know.
Hot take. I think Avatar is better than this movie.
I would agree.
And I think it integrates storytelling into the technological stuff better. But this movie is pretty significant for its use of Technicolor film. It is. It's the first 2-color subtractive Technicolor film.
Which it's nitty gritty, but it's like among the different types of like film, like color film processes that have been happening around now. Yeah. And this is one, as I was talking about earlier, that can be played on a regular projector instead of having to have like a weird 2 projector setup and change the alignment and everything like that.
Yeah. It doesn't need a sort of weird color wheel sort of thing that's part of the projector. It's like you can just project it like a normal film. But the process of shooting it is really weird.
Yeah. I have a book called The Dawn of Technicolor. It's a huge book all about Technicolor, and I can read a quote from someone working on the film about they were shooting two strips at the same time, so they needed an extreme amount of light, and they needed to move the film really fast through the camera, and
it was being shot on a single strip of film, but it was like getting, because of a prism in the camera, it was getting 2 frames.
Yes, being exposed at the same time.
Yeah.
It needed, for people that know photography and filmmaking, it needed 1,200 foot candles for the interiors. So a lot of this movie, like, it's a little blown out in a way, and like there was no way around that because to get all the light that they needed to just dump light onto all of their subjects.
It's almost all exteriors also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the camera operator said, quote, "It was about 3 times as difficult to crank this big camera. If you had a long scene, your arm was so tired that many times, to keep a constant speed, I'd have my assistant help me, take hold of my hand and push it to keep the speed. By the end of the day, your arm was ready to fall off. It was just awful."
Which is like a big consideration in like movies being made at this time, that you had to keep a consistent speed while hand cranking a camera. And also it's like, you get tired cranking a big camera all day.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some interesting things about this movie. I think one of the big ones is, unlike a lot of other movies from this time period, they actually do cast Chinese or Chinese American actors, unlike some other films that we've watched.
Yeah, Dragon Ball Evolution.
Exactly. But yeah, it's definitely like there's a lot of like broken English in the intertitles, which is not the best.
Yeah.
One
thing that I did kind of like, that I guess was done in Foolish Wives as well, is when people were speaking in another language, it initially showed that language on the intertitle and then faded to the English translation.
Speaking of Avatar.
Oh, do they do that in Avatar
They
too?
They do that in Avatar too, yeah. Yeah, there's a couple interesting intertitle things. Like they kind of play with font choices, whatever, typeface. Destiny did that also in like each of its sort of sub stories. The intertitles were in different typeface depending on where in the world it was taking place.
Yeah.
And so this, I think, when characters are supposed to be speaking Chinese, there's a sort of like the
a chop suey
English
font.
Yeah, there's sort of a slightly I don't know how to describe it, but it's English, but it's in a sort of the typeface is meant to look like characters more. There was a funny thing where in like the first scene, someone one of the Chinese characters says the word "whence," and I'm like, no Chinese person has ever said "whence."
Oh, whence. W-H-E-N-C-E.
Indeed. And yeah, this movie's just very sort of tragic and melodramatic. I mean, it's intentionally
it's
very
schmaltzy. It's like there's the magazine Film Daily summed up the story as Chinese girl deserted by her American gives their child to his wife and throws herself in the sea.
Yeah, pretty much. That's the gist of it.
I will say that like Anime Wong like elevates this movie.
She is very good. Like right at the bat, it's like because I think there is you definitely have to sort of in terms of trying to I guess judge silent film performances, like they're very different from acting now, right? But I think there's definitely times, and this is an example of it, where it's like I can tell that she's very good at this specific thing.
Yeah.
Of like not being too big, and just being able to sort of like hold attention, but also just do a lot with very little in terms of her physicality and facial expression. That's like you get everything that you're supposed to get out of the performance without any audio.
It's more of a subtle performance than a lot of stuff like around her and in a lot of other movies at this time. Yeah, but yeah, the story's like fine. I will say that like because of her acting though, I was like getting a little emotionally involved when she was giving away her kid, you know.
Oh yeah, great in that scene.
I mean, so the Chinese setting was getting back to the technology for a second. The Chinese setting was picked because this two-strip Technicolor. It, normally to represent the full spectrum of color that's visible to the human eye, we need red, green, and blue, and this is just red and green Technicolor. So it gets across, realistic color fairly well, although it's this kind of like hyper real, like strange look to it. They picked China because they thought that like Chinese clothes and just imagery would work well with those two colors, red and green. A lot of people are wearing like green qipaos and there's like red roses, and a lot of it's outside in like nature or whatever. But it is called the Toll of the Sea, and the ocean is green in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, so is the sky, yeah.
Yeah.
It's sort of a seafoam green, though. It's sort of a, kind of.
It kind of works.
Yeah.
It's like strange, but you get used to it.
Yeah, it is kind of more teal magenta than like green red, because like everyone's skin tone is sort of some variation on red.
Yeah.
I think the reason why red and green were initially chosen for two-strip Technicolor was because they figured red works for most skin tones, and then green works for most sort of like foliage and like natural sort of environments. And yeah, it is weird looking, but it looks surprisingly good, I think.
Yeah.
For how primitive it kind of is in terms of like color film.
This was but because the process of making these prints was so expensive, it cost about 8 times as much to get a print for Toll of the Sea as another one.
A kind of interesting factoid about this movie is the original ending was lost at some point. Like, there are no copies of it left. And so when this movie was getting restored in the 80s, they got an original 2-strip Technicolor camera and shot new footage of crashing waves and a setting sun, which is what is at the end of the movie now.
Mm-hmm. And you know what's funny? You can tell. Like, you can tell.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
You can tell from... you could tell just from the frame, like the placement of the camera, that it's new. With the...
It also, it's like, the footage definitely looks a little bit higher fidelity, kind of. It isn't as, like, crunchy, contrasty. It's not as scratched up. It's not as grainy.
Yeah. But yeah, that's interesting. And they don't use this a lot, but they utilize this in the intertitles that are kind of bridging the gap between the old and new footage. But painted intertitles, which we see, but these ones are in color. Like utilizing a lot of reds and greens in the paintings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's all right. It's a technical thing. But
it is kind of more interesting for its, like, technological stuff and just the fact that it's Anime One's first film. Like, the actual, right, like, much like the sound stuff, it's, like, taken on its own merits. It's like, Nanook next?
Yeah. Speaking of otherizing movies made about Asian people in some respect, we've got Nanook of the North.
Yeah, very famous movie. The second most famous movie of this year, I would say.
And if it weren't for SpongeBob, maybe the most famous.
I don't know about that. Yeah, this is often credited as the first feature documentary. Which I guess it kind of is. I mean, how you define documentary is arguable, you know?
Yeah.
But I do think this movie distinguishes itself from, like, actuality films that existed right away, like, of just footage of things happening. I feel like this is a movie that is, like, trying to build a real narrative out of mostly staged scenes.
Yeah,
but,
maybe
like,
trying a little too hard to build a narrative.
Maybe trying a little too hard to build a narrative, but it is, the attempt of sort of taking footage of real people and places and creating a narrative out of that into a film, I think is part of what I consider a documentary. So
the way that I characterize Robert Flaherty's, who's the director, Robert Flaherty's approach to documentary is almost like a Disneyland version of a certain culture, an Epcot version, you know? It's trying to take, like, large elements. It's trying to take, like, a huge culture and, like, typify it and distill it down to these iconic things. An igloo, hunting for a walrus, you know?
Yeah.
He has another movie called Man from Iran, not Iran, but Aran, which is a island off of Ireland, I believe, where there's some sort of, like, semi-primitive people who live there, and he has, like, a similar approach where he's just like, what are the things that you do? Now we're going to have you do all of those things for the camera, you know?
Yeah. This movie is about primarily a single person living in Canada. Or sort of Inuit community in Canada.
Upper Canada.
And the sort of main central figure of this movie is, in the movie, is a hunter named Nanook. He was not actually named Nanook.
Yeah. His real name is Alakarialuk.
Yes. Thank you for saying that so I don't have to try to butcher it. And yeah, the general depiction of Inuit life and culture is pretty misrepresented. Like, he's definitely trying to show off sort of like how primitive they are, which in most cases just wasn't true. In like 1922, they like had guns and like modern technology. They knew what movies were. They were just people.
Phonographs were. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a scene. There's a scene with Nanook like seeing a phonograph for the first time and like biting the disc because he thinks it's like a food or something.
Yeah, and like being astonished by it. It's like he knew what phonographs were. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about like the simple Eskimo, and it's like I don't know if this is the best. I mean, I don't know if it's coming from the best place. I guess I feel like Robert Flaherty is overemphasizing the sort of like seemingly primitive nature of this like community, and it's like most of it isn't true.
I mean, I think it's well intentioned, right? Like he lived in this area for a while. The people who he did abandon some of these people when he moved on to film other things. But like the people who are Nanook's wives in the movie were Flaherty's wives.
Mm-hmm.
Like he had wives and children in this community, and like he respected them a lot, but he still otherized them, and he still was making them consumable for a white audience.
Yeah.
There's a documentary about Nanook of the North, or not even about, but just kind of involving, called Nanook Revisited, which was filmed in the 80s, in the same area where Nanook was filmed. So Nanook Revisited is doing what Nanook of the North was kind of intending to do, which is show these people in their like actual surroundings and treating them with respect, right?
Yeah.
So it's showing like daily life in the 80s in this part of the country of Canada, and it is also asking people their thoughts on Nanook. And some people who were children at the time that it was being filmed are like relaying anecdotes about Flaherty and the filming of the movie. One of them, I think this gets at Flaherty's intentions a lot. One of the people who knew Flaherty when he was a kid, and is now an old man, kind of paraphrases him, and he said that Flaherty was saying, "I'm not trying to shoot a film on what the whites made of these people. I'm not interested in the decay of these people. I wanted to show their primitive majesty and their originality as long as it is still possible before the whites destroy not only their character but these people themselves."
Right. The movie Nanook of the North, I think, sets out to show Inuit culture like pre-colonization.
Even though that was kind of a fiction already. Right.
But also, like, the movie doesn't frame it that way. Right? The movie never says that. And I think that's where it sort of...
It's like dishonest in a way.
Goes wrong, yeah. Is that it is... Right. The dishonesty of it. But yeah, I mean, that's I guess the intention is there for something positive, even if it doesn't really... I don't really think it achieves that. But.
It's a fun movie. It's an interesting movie. It's not like you're not learning stuff, but you have to take everything that you're seeing with a grain of salt.
Yeah. And it's like a lot of... I think the kind of misrepresentation I have more of a... That, like, bothers me more, I guess, than this movie also gets sort of dragged a lot for how much of it is just staged, which is like, well, that's whatever. Like, they never shot inside an igloo because it was too dark and the camera was too big. So there's these sort of staged scenes where they, like, built a half wall of an igloo to make it look like they're inside one. It's like, I'm fine with that. I don't care, you know?
There's a part where they're like hunting for a seal, and he didn't want to wait around for a seal to show up, so they just like had a seal. they had someone pulling a rope from the other side of a hole in the ground.
Yeah. There's a walrus hunt, which walrus is referred to as the tiger of the north, which is pretty great.
And he sounds his battle cry, uck uck.
And yeah, there's a bunch of cute husky puppies in this movie, which anytime cute dogs are in movies, I'm a sucker for that. Yeah, I mean, this movie is very interesting, even if it's not necessarily good, question mark.
I would say maybe it's not morally good, but I enjoy watching it.
Oh yeah, I mean, movie. I'd seen this before. I enjoyed rewatching it because it is like I think some of like the actuality films that we watched early on. Like it's cool just to see really old footage of people and places. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
This might have been the first silent film that I saw with a live score. I guess I'm realizing that I saw like a Chaplin when I was a kid with a live score, but as an adult, I saw this in Edinburgh with a live score.
Fancy that.
Because when I go to a new city, I make a beeline for their indie theaters. And I felt really bad because I had seen this already, and I was jet lagged, and so I fell asleep for parts of the movie, which seems disrespectful when people are playing live music, but I did my best.
There you go. Nanook of the North, pretty landmark movie in terms of its approach to like filmmaking and trying to use real life subjects and kind of portray those on film in a way that isn't flatly scripted fictional narrative stuff.
Yeah. And if we're talking about like famous silent films, this is definitely in the top 10.
Yeah. Speaking of Nanook, was it Nanook Revisited?
I believe so, yes.
There is one of my favorite episodes of Documentary Now is a parody of specifically that 80s documentary, and I think it's called Canuck Uncovered.
Yeah.
And it's very good.
It's I like how his name is Canuck.
Yeah. And in that documentary now, it's like it's actually he has a different name. It's like they take the thing of misrepresenting people really far, and sort of things being staged.
And it's interesting that Documentary Now episode is almost like this like reclaiming of power for these like people who are being misrepresented in the movie, because it ends up with Canuck like becoming this like tyrant director of the movie itself,
and like inventing a bunch of cinematic techniques and things like that.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah. All right. I guess we've made it to our last two films. Another film that is, I guess, somewhat blurring the line between documentary and sort of fictional narrative film.
Good segue.
Is Häxan.
Yeah.
Or I
maybe
guess
in Swedish like Häxan.
Maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure what the umlaut really how to properly pronounce the accent.
It means witch. A hexer, one who hexes you.
And this is a Scandinavian film. I believe it was
I think it's Swedish.
A Swedish film, but by a Danish director.
Okay.
Benjamin Christensen. This is a weird movie.
Yes.
Just in terms of
very strange.
Its structure and like how it's like using filmmaking in terms of trying to tell a story, because it's like on one hand it feels almost sort of like an academic presentation.
Yeah. The first reel of this movie is just straight up a PowerPoint.
Yeah, of like old woodcut illustrations and intertitles just kind of explaining some of the history of folklore and witchcraft in the Middle Ages and like where it comes from and all that stuff. And then it gets into sort of, filmed, scripted, like, recreations, I guess, of different points in history to kind of try to tell a story of witchcraft and sort of how it was seen in different points in history. And then at the end, it's sort of recreating more contemporary stuff in an attempt to sort of show what a contemporary understanding of the things that was blamed on witchcraft in the Middle Ages. It's super ambitious. It doesn't really feel like anything else we've watched because of its sort of
like structurally.
Yeah, it's like weird mix of like academic presentation and like straight up like bug nuts horror movie.
Yeah, it's at the same time it's like it's trying to be like educational and academic, but also like lurid and like extreme.
Yeah. It is one of the more like lurid, almost kind of like nasty movies we've watched, just in terms of like the stuff that it's showing on screen.
Yeah.
One thing about this movie that I think we both did not like is the score that exists for it.
Yeah.
Which it is mostly like classical pieces, like classical music, like pre-existing classical music. But it's supposedly what was originally played live for this movie.
Oh, really?
Or it's the closest thing to because the original like score for it is lost, but then there was a later premiere that had this score on it, or this score was played over it. So it's like the closest assumed thing to the original score, but I didn't much care for it. It felt way too whimsical and lighthearted for
a spooky synthesizer guy to write a score for this.
This movie's very spooky, and the score doesn't really support that. A lot of wild images in this movie.
Yeah.
This movie I've been waiting since before we started the show to watch. It's been a movie I've been wanting to watch for a long time. And
How'd you like
when we started the show, I was like, I should just wait until we get to it. It lived up. I think it was possibly an even weirder movie than I was expecting.
Yeah.
And I think the sort of craziness of the imagery lived up to the hype for sure. There's stuff in this that like made me gasp.
Yeah. People. I mean, it would make you gasp to see people dancing on a crucifix, disrespect and spitting on it, disrespect.
That less so.
Kissing the devil's bottom.
That didn't make me gasp, but I was like, that's not something I've seen in film up to this point.
It has a bit of a Méliès sensibility to it, because I think that even this like horrific stuff is playful.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
Like the tone going on in this movie is kind of like wild, because like we're saying, it's like this mix of academic and like lurid imagery demonstrating what witches' Black Sabbaths were like, or whatever.
Well, to demonstrate what the perception of witches' Black Sabbaths were like in the Middle Ages, right? It's like a lot of the images that are shot later on are recreations of like the woodcut illustrations from the first reel. So they're sort of like based on contemporary like Christian understandings of witchcraft and like that sort of thing. So they're all these like very extreme, dancing in the forest with demons and kissing Satan's butt and eating babies and ghost horses.
That stuff's cool to see, though. Like
it is.
But like the thing is, like, while the movie, through like its structure and through its intertitles, is not presenting these things as something that you are like putting yourself into, like the story of a narrative film. It's something that you're kind of like pulled back observing. It calls attention to this in a number of ways, where through the intertitles, it's always going like, we live in a civilized age where we don't believe in things like the devil and hell and witches. We have science and we're smart and enlightened or whatever, which is really interesting. Like, this movie is almost like presenting itself as like post-religious, which I don't really know like what the situation was in Scandinavia at the time, but I would think that there was still like a pretty, sizable contingent of religious people. But maybe they don't want to watch this movie because it's too demonic.
Yeah. Which I think that was sort of a response to it when it came out. It was like, this movie is demonic and evil and people shouldn't be allowed to watch it. The intertitles in this feel more like they're almost like directly addressing the audience in a way that most intertitles aren't. They're sort of very kind of like third person narration. Whereas this is sort of like...
Yeah, it's like, I am making a presentation to you, the audience.
Yes,
and but like another way that it's kind of calling attention to the artifice of what it's putting in front of you is there's a scene where the intertitles say like, one of my actresses wanted to try one of these torture devices. It's like saying like, here is somebody who is playing a character in the movie being herself on screen.
Yeah. Oh, the torture devices. We'll get into that in a second. But, yeah, I think this movie is more about, like, persecution than I expected it to be. I expected it to be a pretty sort of, like, it's just sort of a bunch of scenes of witchcraft through different time periods. And it is very much the sort of main thread, or sort of, like, thesis of it, is how witchcraft was used as a sort of scapegoat and a way to, like, by the sort of people in power in the Middle Ages to persecute people.
Not just that, but like, it is saying that we still do this just under a different name, which I think is wild. It's like a really like it's a really woke movie, like it like
the Republicans would hate this film.
Yeah, it's basically saying like, it's drawing this direct comparison between the way that we treated witches back in the day and the way that we treat women now.
Now being 1922.
Yeah, but like still,
Right.
Like,
well, yeah, because it brings up the idea of the like medical diagnosis of hysteria, which that was before the 20s, but I think it might have still been in practice in the 20s of like, a woman doing something that her husband doesn't like, and it's like, oh, she's hysterical. Give her, cocaine pills or whatever. And yeah, it sort of like is comparing sort of like medieval dungeons to contemporary like asylums and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's basically saying like, we're no better now. Like it's saying like we've got like a nice coat of paint on it, but we still treat mentally ill people in like an inhuman way, like we did back in the day. And it's also saying that like, women back then and now face issues for being too ugly or too pretty,
Yeah.
I think I really like what this movie has to say.
Me too. I did not really expect that from it. Or it's sort of it's sort of big like the points it's trying to make I thought were really feel very progressive for the time, I think. And I don't know, it gets into so much more kind of like nuance than I'm used to seeing from movies from this time period too. Of like just the idea that like people who are accused and executed for being witches, it like you could be an old woman and be accused of being a witch. You could be a young woman and be accused of being a witch. You could be a man and be accused of being a witch. It was like there were no consistent rules because it was just being used as a form of like oppression against people.
Yeah, which is a lot for a movie to say when it has a lot of shots of the devil going like
yeah. The devil, who is played by the director Benjamin Christensen, in really incredible makeup. I think I really like how I like his performance as the devil. It's very silly and over the top.
Yeah,
but like There's the one like very famous shot of this movie of him sort of like popping up from behind a book and like reaching his clawed hands over it, and it's really an effectively very spooky looking shot, mostly due to the lighting. But this movie looks amazing. Also, like the lighting of it, it's much more shadowy than a lot of movies. I think it uses close-ups really well. There's a lot of really great close-ups of people acting and reacting to things that are like really powerful in certain places.
Yeah, there's a part where an old woman is just kind of randomly accused of being a witch, and it follows like her getting, arrested and tortured and everything like this. Maria the Weaver, and there are these scenes that are like close-ups on her face where like you really feel for her. I think the woman playing her does an amazing job because like she is being tortured and you like see that in her face.
Yeah.
It's like upsetting.
Yeah. The way this movie uses close-ups of people's faces is, it's not a new thing. Like, we've seen close-ups before, but like just the way it's used in this movie really struck me, and it feels very modern in certain places because of that, because of just the way that it really holds on people's faces very close up.
Often in anguish.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of anguish in this movie. There's, going back to you mentioned how there's this kind of brief interlude just about like medieval torture devices.
Sick.
And it's sort of academically just like showing them to you, but in such a way that makes each one, like, the power of suggestion in all of these is incredible, because they're just very plainly like, here's a close-up shot of like thumb screws or some weird, like, there's like a block that they strap your hand to, and then it's just like they just bring a hammer into frame and your mind does the rest of like the amount of way they can just show very plainly like the implications of each of these torture devices without actually showing them in practice at all, I thought was really effective. Like, every single time they showed one, I'm just like, I started wincing. I'm just like, this looks terrible. Because, like, it's just your mind doing the rest. Like, once you see how it works, then your imagination goes off, and you're like, oh my god, that is horrifying. This is a very dark movie. Like, there's a lot of stuff in it where I was surprised at how dark it went. And, yeah, like, for all of its depictions of like these, horned demons and like giving birth to demon babies and things.
That was cool.
Very cool. I think it really sort of it really presents the idea that like it's primarily like the men in power who are the real devils.
And it has a lot of sympathy for persecuted people. And and it has sympathy for people who are the victims of sexism. It has sympathy for mentally ill people.
There's a bit where there's the judges of the Spanish Inquisition. There are these medieval judges going around accusing people of witchcraft. And there's an intro title that says something along the lines of, "The witch plague ravages wherever the judges go." Being like, wherever these guys show up, they find witchcraft somewhere, because, they're just accusing people left and right. There's, I mean, trying to think of what else, my other, like, big takes on it.
I mean, I would say also that I have, and this movie kind of invites it because it tells you about the artifice of what's happening, but I have I have questions about how I don't know, sound a lot of the things that it's saying are. It's not, it's like Nanook, it is like taking these kind of bigger concepts and like making them like condensing them into like a story that is like typical but not precise, right?
Yeah.
But like
it's more I think it's more leaning into the fact that it's creating a narrative whole cloth than Nanook does.
But also I wonder like it knows like it makes the viewer aware that it's creating a narrative, but it says that it's doing it in the service of like education or something like that, right? And I think that like all of the like lurid stuff and like extreme stuff in this movie makes me like doubt its intentions a little bit. It makes me think that like maybe sometimes it's gonna pick something that's like a little less historically accurate. Like maybe like for example, like they don't have an Iron Maiden in the movie, but like the Iron Maiden was like not used as a torture device, right?
Yeah.
Like and like, but like it seems like it's the kind of thing that it would just leave in because it's cool, you know. And so it you know, I think the stuff that's valid about the movie are its like I don't know, philosophical things that it's saying, and the and just like the kind of appeal of the imagery on screen. But I have like doubts about like the soundness of its like academic aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially when it gets towards the end and it's talking about this sort of like more contemporary stuff, that to me I was like, oh well, this feels somehow, even though it's talking about newer things, it feels more old fashioned. Because it's sort of like it's coming at it from a place of a 1922 understanding of mental health, which is obviously it's developed since then.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things where it doesn't really have, I think, even the kind of as clear a vocabulary as we do now to talk about.
It's also just like hard to find good information about witches. I've been to like a couple of witchcraft museums, but they're usually run by witches. So their perspective is I don't know. It's historical, but it's also like theological. And I don't know like where one, like it's hard to know where one ends and where the other begins, and so it's hard to know what to trust in a witchcraft museum. And there's just like a lot of like loose information floating around about a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I feel like so much of the sort of general understanding of witches comes from like Christian propaganda of like basically just being used as a tool to oppress people.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, it's like then there's almost like a counterbalance of people who are actually practicing the like spiritual practices of Wicca or like actual witchcraft stuff, is like we want to counteract all of the bad press. And so then it's like, yeah, trying to find a pretty clear, unfiltered information about it can be tough.
Yeah. Speaking of spooky Halloween monsters.
Yeah. So at a certain point during Häxan, I was like, is this the best movie we've watched for this show? Just because of like, on a technical perspective, it's really incredible. It is sort of like, it's just presenting a lot of really interesting ideas, and it's like narratively, like structurally, it's super interesting. And then I watched Nosferatu, and I was like, no, this is the best movie we've watched for this show.
Oh.
Hot take. This movie rules.
It's real good. It's a great movie.
Nosferatu, directed by Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau.
AKA F.W. Murnau.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's easily one of the most famous movies we've watched so far. I'd seen it. I think I had actually only seen it once before. Although the first time I saw this movie was at the Bardavon Theater in Poughkeepsie, which is an old theater with an organ in it. And so I saw this movie with a proper live organ score in a theater. It was, I think it might have been on Halloween also. It was perfect. It was, I could not have seen this movie under better circumstances. But I hadn't seen it since, I saw that probably when I was, I don't know, like 13 or 14. And hadn't seen it in full since then. And so I was still surprised by a lot of it because I didn't remember big chunks of it.
This movie is a definite banger, and like
Yeah.
it
This movie rips.
it flows really well from point to point. Like it doesn't drag really. Like
Yeah.
The spooky guy's real spooky, you know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of tension in the movie. There's a lot of like really iconic imagery in the movie. It's just fun. It's fun and spooky. It's a great Halloween time.
Yeah, one of my notes on it was I do feel like a lot of 1910s films feel kind of slapdash in their writing, in terms of like the narrative structure of them, in terms of like the pacing, all that kind of stuff. And maybe it's because this is based on a book, but I feel like the narrative of it holds together really well in a way that feels distinct. Like, this movie tells a story better than most movies that we've watched up till this point.
Yeah. Especially like it's doing like at the beginning of the movie, I think it does this really like good trick of the main character Hutter is a real kind of happy-go-lucky dimwit, and like the beginning of the movie is drawing a contrast between the like that and the horrors that come later by like really like indulging in him just like frolicking in the woods or whatever.
Yeah.
But like while he's frolicking, it's like talking about vampires enough that like there's like a sense of dread.
Yeah, there's an ominousness hanging over it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's really good. Really good contrast.
Before we get into like the meat of it, I feel like let's talk about a little bit of kind of the backstory, I guess, of this movie. It was produced by a production company called Prana Films in Germany. They made one movie, this one. And I think one of the main reasons for that was because this movie is an adaptation of the novel Dracula, with all the names changed. Dracula was never copywritten in the UK, so it was public domain, or at least their argument was it was public domain when they made this movie. But when it came out, Bram Stoker's widow, Florence, sued Prana Films because she said that they had stolen the intellectual property or whatever, and effectively put them out of business. And then, because of the lawsuit, one of the sort of results of the lawsuit was that the film had to be destroyed. All copies of it had to be destroyed, which thankfully didn't happen because enough copies existed by that point that people were just like, nope, we're keeping this.
Yeah.
But so this is, I think you can't really say that this is either the first vampire movie or the first Dracula movie, because there was a lost film from 1921 from Hungary called The Death of Dracula that is not really an adaptation of Dracula, as far as I can tell, having not seen it, because it doesn't exist anymore. But it's kind of arguable whether or not that movie is either a Dracula movie or really a vampire movie.
We've
But
definitely
it
seen
has,
vampires before.
like, proper vampires like this. I mean, we've seen, sexy ladies in, like, bat costumes.
We've also seen spooky guys turn into bats.
True. Yeah. Mélier's had a lot of spooky imagery he can kind of, lay claim to.
Yeah.
But in terms of all of the sort of conventions of a vampire movie, this basically hits every single one of them.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, it's been a while since I've seen the Coppola Dracula movie, so I'm not like, I don't know exactly, and I haven't read the book, so I don't know exactly how well this follows the story, but it is very much a guy goes into a vampire castle, gets spooked out, and then gets bit kind of situation.
Yeah, I also have not read the book Dracula by Bram Stoker, but I have seen the Coppola movie, which is, I think, or at least sort of markets itself as the closest adaptation of it. And I feel like this follows the book pretty closely up until the end, at least. I mean, the idea of like a real estate guy who goes to Transylvania to meet an old count and gets trapped in his castle, and then the count comes to, his home country, England in the novel, Germany in this, and sort of sets up shop in a new place, and then kind of seduces his wife.
Your wife has a lovely neck.
Yeah. And then gets killed at the end. Like, that is... The broad strokes are exactly the same as Dracula, but there's a lot of... The details of a lot of it are changed.
This movie I saw... This is like a properly spooky movie.
Yeah.
And I saw this a few months ago with a live score, and I was so furious with it because...
Oh, yeah. You've told me this story, but tell it for the show.
So they were playing it around Halloween, and they just like completely disrespected this movie. And I talked to them afterwards, and they said that they thought that it was campy, basically, or like corny or whatever. And so they would, in the soundtrack, add in a lot of like goofy sound effects.
There slide whistles and stuff.
Yeah, I think even a slide whistle at a point. It was like, it was so weird. Like, there was parts of the music that were genuinely spooky, but they would undercut it. They wouldn't allow the audience to take it seriously. So people were laughing the entire time. So there were points where there are like effect shots where they use like they undercrank the camera so that Nosferatu's carriage like moves in a kind of strange fast motion, which is supposed to be spooky, and they just like play a doop 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 doop. It was it goes to show that like these movies, you can like use them as a canvas in a lot of ways, and I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing to do something counter to the movie with that canvas. I could see like a critical score being applied to Birth of a Nation, for example, but when you're watching a silent movie, this and the kind of score for Häxan, you're kind of at the mercy of whoever is writing it, and a lot of the tone of the movie can be defined by that score, even though it's not in control of it.
I mean, the version of it that we watched, which is the Kino release, I think, right?
Yeah.
The Blu-ray, I think has a good score, which I think is the original score written for it, or used for it. Yeah, that is annoying and sucks that happened. I think this movie is genuinely very creepy at times.
Yeah.
I do think there are a lot of things that kind of seem quaint now to modern eyes, but were pretty, I don't know if lavish is the right word in 1922, but there's a lot of effect stuff that is kind of crude stop motion or undercranking, things like that. But I think there's enough different techniques being used at any point that it helps sort of hide some of the seams. Häxan did a lot of that too. Häxan has stop motion, it has double exposure, it has costumes, it has forced perspective, it has all these different things. As does I think they're similar movies in terms of their effects techniques and some of their imagery, right? The devil in Häxan has the long clawed fingers. So does Count Orlok in this movie. Very famously, he's got his big fingernails. There's tons of just iconic images of silent film in this.
Cool shots of Orlok creeping up on Hutter, and then you see his silhouette in shadow. Really, really iconic scene. Super cool shot.
Amazing shadow work in this movie.
Yeah, totally.
Silhouette, projected shadows. There's an amazing shot of just the shadow of Count Orlok reaching out towards a door and his fingers seem to elongate as they like the shadow kind of crosses over the wall. And it's like super simple, just figuring out like from the right angle, if we light this right, we can make this shadow of his fingers look super big and long and creepy.
It's
and
cinema.
It's like, yeah, it works really well. I do think kind of the edge that makes me think that Nosferatu is the better film over Häxan is it feels kind of more purely cinematic.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I think one of the really interesting things about Häxan is the way that it plays with form and the fact that it does have this sort of academic quality to it. This movie is just so good at using like film language that I think it gives it kind of the edge. Mm-hmm. There's just like really creepy. I mean, some stuff is just inherently like the idea of a ship showing up to port and everyone on board is dead and no one knows why. It's just inherently a really creepy idea.
Yeah, it's awesome. Full of plague rats too.
Yeah, a lot of plague stuff in this movie. My sort of big take on this movie, I guess we'll get into that, is that this movie is, I don't know if it's that big a take that this movie is about the idea of like disease, but I think specifically just the time it was made, I think feels very significant. That like there had just been this sort of global epidemic or pandemic of influenza, right? So there was like the idea of like spreading disease through travel was a thing. Mm-hmm. And then also like tuberculosis was still a big thing. And there was, in sort of just reading about that, a thing that had just sort of started after World War One was using heliotherapy, or just like using sunlight or UV rays to treat different types of tuberculosis or lupus and things like that, was a sort of growing trend. So there was already this thing of like sunlight killing disease that I think is, and it's like right around the same time as this movie came out. So I'm like, to me, that seems like a pretty obvious connection. That like that is one of the sort of big thematic things of this movie. But maybe it's coincidence. I don't know.
It's hard to know what to say about this movie because it's just like good. It's just like real solid.
There's, I don't know, I can just name a bunch of cool things in it that I liked.
Do it.
I think Count Orlok is probably the scariest character in film that we've encountered thus far. That's my other big take on this movie, is that Count Orlok is genuinely very scary. Not just because of Max Schreck's performance. Max Schreck, the actor, plays Count Orlok, whose name is reused as Christopher Walken's character in Batman Returns. But it's, he's got the iconic sort of bald head, like, two front sharp vampire teeth thing with the hands, and, it's a very iconic performance of a vampire. And, like, even that, like, vampire design, I still feel like pops up everywhere in, like, What We Do in the Shadows, or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or Salem's Lot, like...
Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah. Exactly. But just this movie really kind of hammers home the idea that like he doesn't even need to be near you to like get you, right? So like the character of Knock, who is sort of loosely based on Renfield from the original Dracula story, is like he's just a guy living in Germany. He never even really meets Orlok, and he still is like driven insane just like through hypnosis or whatever, like the weird vampire powers.
Yeah, there's all of this like stuff of like these weird like psychic connections or like visions that people have that are just anyone who is involved in the influence of Orlok like starts having these like nightmarish visions, and sometimes their mind goes away.
Yeah. Like you really feel that Orlok is like a presence, even more so than like an individual creature or person. Like, another thing that is really great, until like the very end, we never see him like attack or kill anyone. We just see bodies piling up. Like, so like he's getting transported from Transylvania to Germany on a ship, and it's like we see him like come out of his coffin on the ship, but then it's just like the next time we see the ship, everyone's dead, and it's and then he arrives in the fictional town of Visburg in Germany, and it's like people just start dying, and we start seeing like houses being marked with a cross of like there's disease here, or there's a great shot of was it Ellen, who's the sort of Mina Harker character, looking out her window at a bunch of coffins that are being carried down the street. That is, we just see like all this sort of like death and disease being spread around. And it's enough just to know that like Orlok is there. Like we know he's behind it, but it's just like we're just seeing like the after effects of his, you know, vampire hijinks. And then yeah, there's like, I feel like just the way that he's shot and framed is really, really well done, really, really creepy. There's a shot that genuinely made me like shudder. That is towards the end when he's feeding on Ellen, and he's like bent over her with this, you know, biting her neck, and it's like, it's really, really dark. Like there's shadows all over the place. You really can just kind of see his eyes, and like a little bit of like the silhouette of him, like hunched over her on the bed, and it's so creepy. It's like it's such like a classic like vampire image too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this movie's awesome for sure.
Yeah, Nosferatu.
It's
great.
Nosferatu.
Yeah, a lot of people, not me, but I know a lot of people our age only know about this movie because of SpongeBob. It's very funny.
Yes, and portrays Orlok as a silly scamp who likes to flick light switches.
Also, whose name is Nosferatu.
I think his name is Sferatu, and they're saying Sferatu.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
See that? Yeah, that makes sense. I did a bit of research about F.W. Murnau because I didn't know that much about him, like as a person. Mm-hmm. He's another German director who fought in World War One and was haunted by it. It's a lot of themes of like death in his films. What I didn't realize that he actually he moved to Hollywood in 1926. Made Sunrise, one of the first movies to win a Best Picture Oscar. There were two, that and Wings both won like separate Best Picture awards that in 27. I didn't realize he died in 1931 in a car accident.
Oh, wow.
And another just weird thing about it is in 2015, someone broke into his grave and stole his skull. So his skull is missing. Someone has his skull somewhere. Maybe.
Someone's trying to summon Nosferatu.
Apparently there was like they found like candle wax in his like near the like his desecrated tomb. So yeah, there was some kind of likely ritualistic reasoning behind it.
That's sick.
Yeah, it's fucked up.
It's kind of cool though.
Because I was like, I like any German filmmaker from the 1920s. I'm like, what did he do later?
You don't have to find out.
Don't have to find out, but also like he seems like maybe the clearest case of someone who would have been super anti-fascist. He was like a big lefty in Weimar era Germany. So, as was Lotte Reineger, who fled Germany, and was also, I think, pretty vehemently anti-fascist as well.
And they only just got the word for that because fascism just started this year.
There you go. Anything else to say about Nosferatu?
I don't. No. It's spooky.
It's good.
And cool.
Watch it.
Yes. Yeah. Go watch Nosferatu.
Yeah. It is maybe my favorite movie that we've watched on like this whole show. So.
Well, to get into our section of what your favorite episode is, your favorite movie of this episode is, your favorite movie of the first 2.5 decades of film, Nosferatu.
I think so. I think so. I think it takes the cake over like, I don't know, the other like big famous one that we watched, Trip to the Moon. Like,
Yeah.
Well,
it's 20 years later, so they should advance a little bit.
Yeah, no, exactly. But well, there's a lot left to go in the 20s that I'm real excited about. But yeah,
for sure. I feel like I would be inclined to say Nosferatu because it's just such a solid movie. But I think it's boring when we pick the same movie, so I'll go with Häxan.
Yeah. Good job. I think it's also good just to highlight both of those. Like they're both real interesting, real cool, very spooky movies.
Yeah. All right. Well, that'll do it for this episode. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter and whatnot. If you want to be updated about our progress, or maybe see a little vloggy action for our visit to this film festival, post on the stories or whatever.
Yeah.
Just thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And that's it for this episode. Glenn?
Yeah.
I'll see you next year.
See you next year.